Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll give it just another minute or two as people begin to arrive, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we have a quorum and we can go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're thrilled to have you join us today for this important conversation on the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, often abbreviated as to CSRD, and what that means for North American companies. Over the next hour, we're going to be breaking down CSRD requirements and showing you how to get ahead no matter your starting point. One quick housekeeping item. We are anticipating plenty of questions to come through. So if you have questions along the way, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We have a moderator that will be gathering all of your questions, and we'll do our best to answer all of them at the end during a Q&A. Katie, if you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. My name is Christy Plume. I'm the Senior Manager of our ESG consultancy here in North America, and I'll be your host for today's session. I'm also thrilled to be joined by two of our own subject matter experts, Daniela Cardoso and Katie Halpin, both senior sustainability consultants on the ESG consulting team, and both bringing an impressive track record in guiding clients through their CSRD journey to today's call. I'm also honored to have two special guests today, Camille Charon, Vice President of Sustainability Reporting at Schneider Electric. Camille brings invaluable insights as a Wave 1 reporter. And we also have Sarah Stiff joining us, the ESG controller at Legend Biotech, one of our clients. And Sarah represents the perspective of a Wave 2 reporter. So I'm confident you'll find their perspectives insightful because Wave 1 reporters like Camille have already gone through the first cycle and can share lessons learned, while Wave 2 reporters like Sarah are preparing under the revised thresholds and timelines, giving us a full view of both the existing experience that she's going through, as well as upcoming challenges. So now that you've met the speakers, let's look at the foundation that enables these insights. We are SE Advisory Services. SE Advisory Services is our dedicated consulting arm focused on helping organizations navigate sustainability regulations and strategies. We're backed by Schneider Electric, the world's most sustainable company, and we bring global expertise and AI-powered tools to accelerate progress across ESG strategy, decarbonization, energy management, climate risk, and digital innovation. Our mission is to simplify complexity and to accelerate sustainability performance, ensuring that our clients not only comply, but leverage reporting as a driver of business value. So if we move on to the agenda, I'd like to show you what you can expect over the next hour. We will start with a poll shortly to gauge where you are on your CSRD journey, and then we'll set the stage for why preparations matter, or preparation matters, even if timelines feel paused. From there, my colleagues will walk you through CSRD implications and strategic opportunities. You'll also hear real-world reporting insights from Camille and Sarah. And then Katie will dive deeper into key elements of CSRD like the double materiality assessment, the EU Taxonomy. And then we'll come back to Camille and Sarah to revisit how they prioritized strategies when everything felt urgent. Then we'll wrap with a Q&A and a final poll. So if we could move on to the next slide. Before we dive in, let's take a quick pulse. Where are you on your CSRD journey? Here in a moment, you'll see 5 options, including not started, just beginning, on pause, ongoing, or completed. So go ahead and take a moment to select the one that best reflects where your organization is today. And then we'll give it just another moment. Okay, Anna, are you able to reveal the results? All right, looks like we've got a little bit of a mixed bag. So for those of you that selected not started or just beginning, this is a great place to begin on today's webinar because the hope is that today's session will give you clarity on what CSRD means for you and practical steps to start building your roadmap before deadlines catch up. If you're on pause, today's insights will help you restart with confidence and avoid last-minute pressure. For those of you that selected ongoing, my hope is that today's session will validate your approach, highlight advanced considerations like double materiality and the EU Taxonomy. And a few of you selected completed, so congratulations on completing your first CSRD report. That is no small feat. Wherever you are on your journey, the key takeaway is that preparation matters. Even if the clock feels paused, the work to get ready is really just beginning. And that takes us to our next slide. The clock may be paused, but the work is just beginning. So compliance expectations continue. Readiness means taking action now, especially on data, governance, and double materiality. And what we're seeing is that a lot of North American companies are grossly underestimating the scope because CSRD is not just a reporting exercise. It's a transformation across finance, operations, risk, sustainability, and legal teams, among others. So early action equals resilience, whereas waiting can mean costly catch-up and reputational risk. And that's why today we're unpacking what CSRD readiness really means for you, common gaps that we're seeing, and also how to use the time that you have now to build an audit-ready foundation. Not have to be just about this single regulation. It can be about building a foundation for multiple frameworks. And that's really where the concept of interoperability comes in. So even with recent pauses like the omnibus delay for CSRD and the temporary halt on California's SB 261 as recent as this week, these frameworks are not going away. SB 253 remains active, and global disclosures like IFRS and the EU Taxonomy continue to advance. So early preparation positions you for CSRD, and it also enables alignment with other major standards and laws. And what this means is that the work that you do now can serve multiple frameworks and future-proof your ESG strategy. And that's a huge opportunity to streamline reporting and turn compliance into strategic advantage. So next up, what this means for North American companies and the strategic advantage of acting now. I will hand it over to you, Danny, to walk our listeners through that.
Thank you, Christy. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Next slide. So I wanted to set the stage for this section by giving everybody a high-level overview of the CSRD. And so, as many of you know, the CSRD, introduced by the EU in January 2023, was created to modernize and expand previous non-financial reporting rules. And it's designed to bring sustainability reporting to the same level of rigor as financial reporting. Regarding its purpose, the CSRD establishes a unified framework for sustainability disclosures for companies that operate in the EU, and the goal is to essentially ensure that ESG data is transparent, comparable, and credible, enabling investors, regulators, and stakeholders to make more informed decisions. Under the current CSRD, around 10,000 companies worldwide fall within the CSRD scope. Regarding disclosure, the directive requires detailed disclosures on material ESG topics. Finally, perhaps mention here that compliance within the CSRD offers more than regulatory alignment. It enhances transparency and accountability, improves risk management, and is a strategic opportunity to position sustainability as a core business driver. Next slide. Okay, so here, now that we have established what CSRD is, let's explore how it differs from ESRS. While CSRD is the overarching regulation that sets the reporting requirement, ESRS provides the detailed standards and guidance on what and how to report. And understanding this distinction is therefore critical for compliance, since without ESRS alignment, companies cannot meet CSRD requirements. Next slide. Okay, so now that we have a clear understanding of how CSRD and ESRS are different, let's dive into CSRD's reporting structure. As mentioned before, ESRS is the only framework that companies can use for CSRD compliance. The framework, as you can see in the slide, is comprised of cross-cutting standards known as ESRS 1, General Requirements, which covers reporting principles, double materiality, reporting boundary, value chain, and time horizons. And ESRS 2, General Disclosures, which covers governance, strategy, policies, targets, due diligence, and performance metrics. In addition, you can see the cross-cutting standards. ESRS has topical standards that cover specific ESG themes across 3 key pillars. As a result, ESRS ensures that sustainability information is reported in a standardized way across all companies in scope, making disclosures comparable and reliable for investors and regulators. Next slide. Okay, so here, as many of you know, the Omnibus simplifications were introduced by the European Commission to align sustainability rules with competitiveness goals under the EU Green Deal. This simplifications is reporting requirement while keeping the CSRD's core goal of building resilient, risk-aware businesses. The changes will reduce the number of companies required to report under the CSRD by up to 90%. And in addition, the extended CSRD deadlines, which have already been approved, give companies more time to prepare and reduce immediate administrative pressure. Moreover, the simplified ESRS reduces data points by 68%, leaving approximately 700 indicators. Despite these changes, companies must still disclose how sustainability issues affect their business model and strategy, ensuring stakeholders continue to receive meaningful, decision-useful information. Next slide. Regarding scope and applicability, discussions and negotiations are happening on the Omnibus thresholds as we deliver this webinar today. Therefore, the thresholds are subject to change. However, the information that we're about to share with you reflects the latest status, but it's not the final source of truth. So as you can see from this slide, CSRD impacts both EU and non-EU companies with significant operations in Europe, especially those exceeding 25 million euros in turnover. In this case, for today, we would like to point your attention to Wave 2 and Wave 4, since these requirements are relevant for North American companies with operations in the EU. In particular, as of today, the proposed threshold for North American companies that fall under Wave 2 is more than 1,000 employees and either more than 50 million euro net turnover or more than 25 million euro in their balance sheet. As for the timeline, Wave 2 needs to report in 2028, covering 2027 data. Regarding Wave 4, the proposed threshold for North American companies is net turnover of more than 450 million euro in EU and more than 50 million euro of an EU branch or one large EU subsidiary that meets 2 of the following criteria: 25 million euro balance sheet total, 50 million euro turnover, and or 250 employees. As for the new timeline, Wave 4 companies need to report on 2028 data in 2029. And again, take this with a grain of salt because right now there's ongoing negotiations on the thresholds. Next slide. Okay, so given the current uncertainty around CSRD scope, as you can see, companies should take a proactive approach and begin preparing for cross-functional collaborative reporting. Reporting in this case under the CSRD goes beyond environmental issues and requires input from stakeholders across the business. Sustainability data will be part of annual reports that need to be approved by senior leaders, and XBRL tagging is improving accessibility, especially for investors and analysts. In addition, reports must be externally verified, so accuracy and expertise across departments is critical. And on top of metrics, companies need to share their policies, goals, and actions and connect sustainability to their overall business strategy. So, with that, I'll hand it over to Christy to explain how we're approaching reporting together. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Danny. Time to get some fresh perspectives from our guests. So Sarah and Camille, let's talk about the early stages of CSRD readiness. For many companies, the starting point can feel pretty daunting and overwhelming. So I'd love to hear your experiences on this. Starting with Sarah first. Sarah, can you share with us what part of the CSRD process felt the most daunting for you at the start?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of it felt daunting, but really two main things come to mind. The first is the assurance requirement. So I'm a financial statement auditor by background, and I actually did ESG assurance for many years. And so knowing that assurance was going to be part of the requirements did feel really daunting, knowing we had to have the documentation in place, that our data had to be complete and accurate, and that we were really going to have a third party come in and look at that was a bit daunting at first, but making sure that we get the processes in place for that was important. And then the other piece was the double materiality assessment. For us, it was just knowing we'd have to get that many stakeholders in place for a common purpose was a bit challenging and daunting. And knowing that in the past, they might have been involved in an enterprise risk assessment and they really understand that financial materiality piece, but making them understand that impact materiality piece too, not just the impacts to our company, but how does our company impact society and the environment. And then just again, making sure that it's all ready for assurance at the end of the day.
Great perspective. Thanks for that insight. And absolutely agree with you. Assurance and double materiality are two of the most complex elements given the level of rigor CSRD demands. So that makes a lot of sense. Those areas often feel overwhelming, I think, because they require both technical depth, but also a lot of stakeholder engagement and alignment. So thank you for sharing that perspective. Camille, you've already been through this as a Wave 1 reporter. So from your experience, what part of the process felt the most daunting at the beginning for you?
Well, for us, we've had publication on sustainability since 20 years. I guess the first thing was really to have a clear view on the gaps we have, if any, in terms of data requirements. The first step, of course, was to run the double materiality analysis to be clear on the reporting requirements. This assessment involved the collaboration of various teams, especially the sustainability team, the group risk management function, and the duty of vigilance committee, which is a French regulation that we have on the top to look at our value chain. So this process already existed for us. But then came the trickiest part, which was to be clear on the detailed requirements, and the devil is in the details, and the data gaps, if any, and new need in terms of data flow and architecture. So to be clear, we needed to get answer to the following questions. When a KPI was already tracked, was the calculation basically compliant with the standard? And I echo Sarah on the obligation to have an audit and be compliant with that. Second, if a KPI was not tracked, what would be the data flow to get it? And third, what should be the end-to-end data flow from the source tool to our ESG reporting tool, and the data granularity that we would have to ensure we have the right control and validation. This was, for us, the most daunting at the start.
Thanks for that. Great insight. The gap analysis and double materiality set the foundation, and using your ERM and duty of vigilance seems to have really added real strength. So also, I appreciate your reminder that data architecture and compliance details matter for anyone starting this journey. So thank you both. I also would love to ask the two of you, and Camille, we can start with you now. Given that data from multiple teams and departments are needed to fulfill CSRD's reporting requirements, how did you go about devising a data collection strategy and engaging all of the necessary stakeholders, given how many stakeholders are involved in CSRD reporting?
Sure. So first, there was a clear engagement and impulse given from our COMEX member. All were really involved, and we had quarterly reviews. It was really managed like a project with quarterly steerco and a strong involvement from our top management. There has been multiple internal global communications to explain the regulatory change, why it was important for us to comply, and as a leader in sustainability to fully comply with it. Trainings were made available and where CSRD was detailed and explained. This was the first step. And then we built a central project team led by sustainability and finance leader to make the link between our environmental, social, and governance team and the data flow workstream, because I spoke earlier about data, and it's really, for us, it was where we spend the most of energy to make sure that we were secure on that part. And for each KPI, whether they were quantitative or qualitative, we defined KPI owners, which were the experts with the knowledge, KPI approvers, and we made basically each contributive function accountable for the accuracies of the KPIs. And this was key. So around that, we had the necessary governance in place to ensure that any estimate was properly approved and governed.
Great overview. That really shows the scale of CSRD's operational lift. And I think standing up governance, assigning KPI owners, and aligning every function takes time, but also a lot of change management. And clearly demonstrates that CSRD, this kind of goes back to the original point that I made earlier, that CSRD isn't just a reporting exercise. It's truly about building an enterprise-wide data ecosystem. So Sarah, turning to you now, I'll ask you the same question. Given that, data from multiple teams and departments are needed to fulfill this reporting requirement, how did you approach the design of your data collection strategy, and also engage the full set of stakeholders?
Yeah, so we had a similar approach to Camille, and it really started with our ESG committee. So management level, people involved at the management level, and really getting them to understand what are the requirements of CSRD and these other regulations and why is it important. And they communicated that to their teams so that when we were having one-on-ones with SMEs to collect this data, that they understood that this was a priority from their leadership team. And then also we would just reinforce this is where the information ultimately landed. So, making sure they understood that it was going to be in a public facing document. We also made sure that they had a clear understanding of the timelines and what was expected of them. And so I think that was key. But on our side of things, we also had to be flexible, They haven't been asked to provide this data in the past. And so it was kind of a discovery process with, okay, this is what we need to report. This is the data that we have available. And it wasn't always a 1-for-1. Sometimes we had to come up with estimates on, hey, here's the data that we have available. How can we build an accurate and complete estimate off the data that we have? Or how can we change existing processes in place so that we're tracking new information that we're going to need to report later on? So we did have to be flexible with our data owners to kind of come to an agreement on what was possible with the data that we had available.
Thanks for that. I think your points really capture the reality that even with strong governance and clear ownership, teams are still spending a significant amount of time aligning on kind of the expectations and also interpreting the requirements in addition to validating the data. And I think being flexible when it comes to your data is a really good reminder that CSRD data collection is just not only both collaborative, but it's also resource heavy. So that brings me to one last question. What piece of advice, and Sarah, I think because you're a kind of a first-time reporter under Wave 2, I'd love to hear from you on this. What piece of advice you have for people that are dealing with subject matter experts across legend biotech that haven't historically been asked to provide this kind of data in the past?
Yeah, I think the first step in just table stakes is really making sure that you have that leadership buy-in. That's the most important, but also from the piece of education. So making sure they understand the requirements, and even going beyond that, we're partnering with our internal audit team to develop a training that can be available so that the data owners understand this is what good data looks like. These are the checks that you need to do on the data in advance of handing it over to us. So I think those are some important considerations that companies can think about.
Yeah, definitely. Good points on embedding ESG into training and audits. I think it makes compliance part of business as usual. Okay, well, with that, that brings us to our next section. So now that we've covered a little bit on stakeholder engagement and data readiness, let's look at CSRD itself. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Katie, and she will walk you through the components of CSRD, providing you with a practical preparation checklist, and also walk you through kind of a deeper dive around double materiality assessments and the EU Taxonomy requirements. So over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Christy, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. So before I deep dive into the double materiality assessment and the EU taxonomy, I first want to zoom out and think about CSRD preparation overall, since that's what Sarah and Camille were speaking about. The first step we know is to conduct the DMA. This is a requirement, and it's going to inform what topics that you're ultimately going to report on. Once you have your material topics, though, next Schneider recommends kind of 3 steps that are going to address the need for data governance and structure that Sarah and Camille mentioned. So first, you're going to need to identify your stakeholders, of course. As Danny spoke about earlier, the scope of this report will go far beyond what has been historically reported. So getting your stakeholders on board early is going to be critical to make that data collection process easier. As you identify stakeholders, also aim to understand where your gaps are. Are you ready to report this data? Does it need to start getting collected for the very first time? And then if it needs to get collected, who's going to collect it? And then who's going to check it? Once you get a handle on your data gaps, also think through if there are any gaps that you want to close. Maybe you don't want to close any of your gaps, but maybe you also want to use this as an opportunity to update policies, actions, and targets to better align with current best practices. Finally, the last step, of course, is to do the actual disclosure. But to disclose for CSRD, you'll need a year's worth of data, and then time for drafting, internal sign-off, external assurance, and then XBRL tagging. So it's going to take some time to prepare this actual report. This isn't going to be something that your sustainability team is going to be able to crank out in a couple of weeks. So since the DMA is the first step and the step that most people are familiar with, this is the first element that I want to zoom in on. CSRD mandates that the double materiality assessment serves as the lens of a CSRD disclosure, because ultimately the goal is to disclose what matters for your company and to leave the rest behind. And EFRAG is very upfront about this. We are not trying to boil the ocean here. The goal is to allocate resources to where it's most important. A double materiality assessment also ensures that a company is accounting for multiple audiences. These sustainability statements are going to be used by both financial and impact stakeholders. However, of course, the DMA comes with some challenges. Most importantly, you'll have to define and then evaluate your company's impacts, risks, and opportunities. And without a super prescriptive process from EFRAG, companies have taken a range of approaches, some more complicated than others, but all requiring a significant amount of time. A DMA also requires a lot of stakeholder input from both internal and external stakeholders, ideally. Many of these stakeholders don't live in the ESG world, and so they're often going to require some education and coaching, as Sarah mentioned. It's also difficult to engage certain stakeholders, particularly something like leaders, just because of that aforementioned time commitment. However, a DMA offers really helpful insight for a company's risk management. And once it's done, now you have a really robust assessment that you can use to set strategic priorities. Right now, I think a lot of North American companies are kind of holding their breath to see if they fall in or out of scope of CSRD. But of all of the things that you can do, I think a DMA is a really safe box that you can check right now. If you fall out of scope of CSRD, that DMA is still something that can be used for other materiality reporting requirements like GRI or ISSB. And it's also something that you can take to your leadership teams and say, hey, this is what's important, and these are the ESG topics that we should be thinking about. Next, I'm going to dive into the second disclosure requirement we're taking a closer look at today, the EU Taxonomy. At its core, the EU Taxonomy is a classification system that determines what types of economic activities contribute to sustainability. So, to comply with the EU Taxonomy, first you must evaluate if the economic activities that your company participates in contribute to one of the 6 environmental objectives listed here. And then you'll also have to evaluate those economic activities to make sure that they don't detract from or do no significant harm from all of the other environmental objectives listed. Finally, you'll have to ensure that your company complies with certain social safeguards established by frameworks from the UN and the OECD. From my extremely brief description of the EU taxonomy, I think it will come as no surprise that this too comes with its own challenges. First and foremost, the technical screening criteria to determine alignment is just that. It's very technical. You'll need relevant data in some cases, and will likely need to engage some very specific stakeholders to assess your alignment. Second, let me be very clear, the required disclosure here is on financial data. I know there's a lot of reticence to report financial data in the context of ESG. So again, you'll need to engage and get sign-off from finance, your CFOs, and your financial auditors. However, taxonomy alignment can and is being used by investors to identify and invest in companies that are truly operating in a sustainable way. In this way, this moves us forward towards transparency and accountability while also opening up potential access to capital. Now that we've deep dived into some of the requirements of CSRD, you might be feeling overwhelmed, and that's understandable. So I'm actually going to hand it back over to Christy, Camille, and Sarah to talk about how they approach the challenge of sorting through all of these competing priorities.
Awesome, Katie. Thank you for walking us through some of those core elements. So we've explored those, and I want to circle back now to Sarah from Legend and Camille from Schneider for more insight and perspective from them. So let's start with you, Sarah. As a first-time reporter, can you walk us through how you prioritized actions when everything feels, I was starting to say felt, but feels urgent?
Yeah, and it's what is urgent changes from time to time because we have seen a number of regulatory challenges in the EU and, as you mentioned, in California this week. And so what we do first is really focusing on our material items. What is important to our investors, to our patients, what's important to our employees and other stakeholders, and making sure that we're focusing on those items first. And that's really also rooted in our strategy and its mission, our mission and values, and that really informs our sustainability strategy. And then another thing is we did a gap assessment with Schneider, and that really helped identify what are the toughest gaps that we have, focusing not only on those material items, but from those material items, what are the things that are going to be most difficult to close? And so focusing on those first. And a lot of times, that ended up being the quantitative metrics. The qualitative metrics, they can change from year to year and change as our company grows and develops. But the quantitative, we have to make sure that there's sound processes in place to make sure that we have that complete and accurate data that we're going to have to report. So a lot of times it did end up being us focusing on those quantitative metrics. It also meant we had to delegate efficiently. There's no one person that can really be in charge of everything, and so making sure that our SMEs and data owners really know that they have to own this data, they have to own this process, and they have to own the completeness and accuracy of this data. And of course, on our end, we're going to do additional checks, but making sure that they're kind of signing off as this is complete, this is accurate was important. And then from there, we've really just been taking this time that Omnibus has given us to focus on our strategy and focus on how do we operationalize sustainability for the policies, actions, targets? How do we continue to develop those so that we'll have more robust items to report on whenever Wave 2 filing does come around?
Your approach shows how much effort goes into getting the foundation right. I think especially as it relates to the data accuracy, the mapping of the rules, and standing up processes that are going to last. It's a big investment up front, but certainly essential for a smooth first disclosure cycle. So thanks for sharing. Camille, I would love to ask you the same question. How did you prioritize everything when there were so many competing priorities and everything felt urgent?
Well, I would say the first priority was to be clear on our ability to deliver and defining key responsibilities. And I think with Sarah, we've come back on that point, which was really key for everyone to make sure that at the end of the day we achieve. And then in terms of reinforcing the reporting process through digitalization, we knew that we could not achieve 100% end-to-end digitalization in 1 year. Hence, we focused on the tools that would contribute the most and that would the most free up energy, looking at the volume or the complexity of the KPIs. Because as Sarah explained, having a sound grounds for quantitative KPIs, I think is very important to make sure that we free up energy afterwards. On the qualitative work stream, on building the full report, on making sure that we were answering to all data points was also a huge piece, not to be underestimated. Here, the key was really to have the proper role and responsibilities defined again, as well as the proper governance in place to ensure that the overall process was fluid.
It's interesting because Sarah, I hear that your focus was on kind of the quantitative aspect of data, and Camille, yours was on the qualitative. And I think this is a great illustration of how different organizations approach readiness. Whereas one perspective highlights the importance of strong quantitative foundations, getting the data right, leveraging digital tools for efficiency. And then the other perspective reminds us that qualitative elements like governance, roles, and narratives are also equally critically important for a complete and credible report. And I think in reality, success often comes from balancing both. So robust data supported by clear governance and storytelling is a winning combination that not only meets compliance, but builds trust and creates more value. So thank you for sharing. Camille, I would love to ask you one final question. Because you already have a CSRD reporting cycle under your belt, I'd love to know from you, how do you envision Schneider Electric's ESG processes evolving in response to CSRD requirements over time?
Well, being part of Wave 1, I guess we are looking at several things. First, as it's the second publication, it will be the second and then third. As time flies, I think we want to improve and simplify the reporting processes behind to make sure they are, again, as fluid and efficient as possible. And this is something that you can reflect on after a couple of years and see whether there are some wins that you can take here and there. And then we will strengthen the reporting process, notably by ensuring that we have the necessary internal control in place on key KPIs, And this is something that is mandatory by the standard. On the third, we'll continue our digitalization journey. As I said a bit earlier, it was very hard to be 100% end-to-end digitalized in 1 year, but we are continuing the journey, and it's very important, especially on the domains where it creates value, not only to comply with the standards, but also to our operations. And then, of course, we'll closely look at the evolution of the text with Omnibus ongoing, and also the peers comparison to reflect on what we did. And the more we'll have, we'll take also some I guess, insights from others' publication to see where we could improve ourselves.
That's a solid strategy. Thanks for sharing. Making processes leaner while building resilience through governance and technology makes a lot of sense. I think, focusing on digitalization where it adds value is key, but also staying close to the Omnibus shows strong foresight. So thank you both very much for sharing your insights. It's clear that preparation is a major factor in CSRD success. So now let's hear from our audience. And Katie, if you wouldn't mind pulling the presentation back up, because we're going to issue another poll. And this time the question we're asking you is, how much time do you think is required to prepare for CSRD? Your options are 1 to 6 months, 6 to 12, or more than 12 months. So take a moment to select the option that best reflects your perspective or experience. We'll give it just a couple more moments, and then we'll share those results with you. Oh, okay. I like these responses. The majority chose more than 12 months, which is correct. Thank you all for voting. So in reality, preparing for CSRD disclosure is often close to a 2-year journey, especially when you're factoring things like data collection, governance, and assurance processes. So if you were thinking 6 months, that's probably pretty ambitious unless you already have strong systems in place. And so that brings us to our next point, is when it's kind of circled around or centered around when you should start. And the short answer is as early as possible. Starting now gives you the runway to build robust processes and avoid last-minute scrambling. So what you're seeing now is look at the timeline that is typically involved in CSRD reporting and why early action is critical. So the slide that you're looking at shows the key phases of CSRD readiness and when to start. And we're assuming that you are a Wave 2 reporter, subject to provide information or publish your report in 2028 on 2027 calendar year information. Let's back up from that timeline to today, and starting with your double materiality assessment that on average can take 5 or 6 months, more or less. And this is the foundation of your report. So you have to identify financially material and material impactful topics. Doing so is critical because everything else that you're going to do to get ready to report to CSRD builds on your double materiality assessment. So once you have the outcome or the results of your double materiality assessment, you can transition into readiness. And this is where you're evaluating ESG practices, data, and governance to identify gaps and also prioritize your next steps. Readiness is also a great opportunity to conduct internal educational workshops to the vast number of stakeholders and data owners that are going to be responsible for tracking and getting the data that you will have to disclose on. And readiness can take around 2 months. So after readiness, that's where we move into implementation. And this is really where your policies, actions, and targets linked to material topics are operationalized. So the interesting thing about CSRD compared to most other sustainability reporting frameworks to date is that most other frameworks are prompting you or encouraging you to report on information from the previous year. And while that's true of CSRD, there is also a component or a requirement that is prompting you to provide information on policies, actions, and targets linked to your double material topics to show how you are managing those material topics in real time. And so implementation can usually take around 6 months. After implementation comes data management. And this is where it's really, really important to have an established automated data collection system in place. You're automating your data collection, you're and also validating across systems is essential for accurate and auditable reporting. We don't recommend using Excel-based files for tracking your data. While you can do that, it's considered high risk because all of your data has to be assured. So getting the right system set up, if we're looking at a year out from today, having that system set up so that you are ready to start collecting that data in an automated fashion for the duration of 2027 is what you have to do in order to have information that then gets translated and structured into an audit-ready disclosure as part of your disclosure preparation that will start towards the end of December and go into early 2028. So as you can see, this is not a quick sprint. It's about a 2-year journey. Starting early means that you can pace these steps, you can avoid bottlenecks, and you can also ensure quality. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today, from early challenges to readiness timelines. So I think it's appropriate now to open it up for questions. And we do have some questions that have already come through. So please continue to drop your questions in the chat. We'll try to address as many as we can. And in the meantime, let me get to my notes to see what questions are coming through. Okay, we have a question on XBRL tagging. What is XBRL tagging? Katie, I'm going to hand it over to you to answer that question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. So at the end of the day, XBRL tagging is a digital tagging practice to basically make your CSRD responses machine readable. This is actually already a really common practice requirement in financial reporting. So basically different data points are going to get tags so that similar data can be extracted and compared across companies in a really easy way and also in a digital way. So this helps brings transparency and comparability to that ESG data that's going to live in the sustainability statement as well.
Thanks for that, Katie. The next question that came through, do you centralize waste and recycling documentation, or do you allow a plant location to keep this documentation? Sarah, I'm going to hand that over to you.
Yeah, I chuckled when I saw this one come through because I feel like waste is always one of those very difficult metrics. And so currently it's a decentralized process for us right now. But since we are getting ready for assurance and we know that our auditor is going to come in and ask for data related to that, we are working to centralize that process. We're actually working with Katie and the Schneider team to implement the indicator management module so that the support would be uploaded by the sites, and so we could have access to that. We also, with waste, we are collecting activity data, but that's an area that we're also working on estimating for the sites that don't have activity data available.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, and Resource Advisor, which is our data management software that we provide for clients, does have the capabilities, as Sarah just mentioned, for waste invoice management in North America, and is an option for centralization as well. Next question. Thus far, through Omnibus deliberations, the DMA seems to continue as a core part of CSRD. Have you seen any evidence or updates that change or lower the requirements related to the DMA And Danny is Danny, I'll hand it to you first, and then you can pass the baton to Camille.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So the DMA continues to be a core element of the CSRD, even with the proposed changes of the Omnibus package. At this time, there's actually no evidence or updates that lower the requirements to DMA since it is so central for CSRD compliance. However, one thing to note, though, is that even though the core principles remains, there are ongoing discussions about refining the DMA process, and we'll know more about this when a decision on the Omnibus is made and when we actually receive the ESRS exposure drafts at the end of this month. Camille, anything additional that you'd like to add on that front?
Yeah, I guess, so again, nothing is set in stone, and there are a lot of discussion, negotiation going on in the EU, but I guess the spirit is to try to simplify the DMA. It doesn't mean that it's still a core exercise that you will need to do, but I think that they are trying to streamline a bit the requirements and make the approach a bit more pragmatic. But again, nothing is set in stone. It's still not finalized, not adopted. So that's the only, there is an attempt.
Thanks, Camille. Okay. Sarah, because you have a background previously as an auditor before you became the ESG controller at Legend, we have a question for you. What are some of the specific actions and controls you're implementing to prepare for assurance?
Yeah. So we've been working on a number of different controls. I would say some of our biggest one, or our most effective ones, is we implemented a completeness checklist, and this is specifically for GHG emissions. Really making sure that we capture all of the emission generating activities that are going on at our sites. Do they have diesel generators that we didn't know about previously? And so we send them a list of, here are all the potential emission generating activities that could be occurring at our company or that could be occurring at the site. They fill it out to say, yes, this is applicable. And then we reconcile that back with what we knew previously. And if there are any discrepancies, making sure that we include that in our inventory on a go forward basis. A couple other ones that have been helpful for us is doing the variance analysis. So looking at different sites and their usage, say natural gas, steam, electric power, and doing a variance analysis to see what have the changes been and are those changes warranted? Did we have an increase in production, or did potentially somebody just mistype? Things like that. So making sure that we have that variance analysis in place so that we can follow up with the sites individually to investigate those variances. And maybe one last one that's really helped us too is we have a tie-out now, and tie-out procedures that we perform to make sure that everything in our final report ties back to the underlying documentation. And then also ties back to all of the requirements listed in the standards. So under voluntary reporting, the voluntary standards that we use as we move into CSRD, those will be the ESRS, and making sure we hit all of the shall disclosures so that we're not missing anything in our report.
Great, thanks for that, Sarah. Danny, I'm going to turn to you now. What is the biggest misconception in North America? What is the biggest misconception North American companies have about CSRD?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, Christy. I think that one of the biggest misconceptions that North American companies have about CSRD is that CSRD will not apply to them. And particularly since there's ongoing discussions on the omnibus thresholds at this time. However, the reality is that even under the changes proposed under the omnibus, North American companies with significant operations in the EU will be in scope and will at least need to report on 2028 data in 2029. Another misconception is that North American companies, due to report on 2028 data in 2029, often assume they can wait until then to prepare for their disclosures. However, some will need to report as early as 2028 on 2027 data, and those reporting in 2029 require at least, as mentioned before, 2 years of preparation due to the complexity and resource intensity of CSRD compliance. Finally, maybe just one last misconception is that some folks assume that CSRD is just another ESG disclosure. However, CSRD goes far beyond ESG reporting. It mandates detailed disclosures aligned with ESRS, structure and digital reporting, and mandatory assurance.
Thank you for that. Okay, we've got 2 more questions and then we'll bring it to a close. So Katie, I might ask you to keep this brief just to make sure we can stay within our time. But what's the role of finance and legal in CSRD readiness?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it actually speaks volumes, but that both Camille and Sarah are from their finance departments at their organizations. So I would say finance is absolutely critical as the sustainability department. They're just going to have to work hand in hand. In terms of legal, we actually haven't talked about that much. But at the end of the day, CSRD is an exercise in legal compliance. This is a law that companies have to report to. So ultimately, the buck is going to stop at legal to determine applicability and the whens and the hows and the wheres. And so legal is going to be really important to make sure that you are actually in compliance with the requirements of the law. So outside of just drafting. And then I'll also say legal is also going to be important to address kind of the interplay between EU law like CSRD and then also what's happening in the US with regulation. There's a lot of push and pull between deregulation and regulation right now. And at the end of the day, it's the legal department that's going to have to legally justify what companies are doing and when and how.
Good points. Thank you. We've got 1 more question for Sarah and Camille. How easy or how hard has it been for sustainability teams to make a business case for investing in more automated data collection and capture systems? What are the strongest arguments to make with strict ROI and payback requirements?
I can take this one. So again, I think that so for Schneider, we've been publishing around ESG since a while, since more than 20 years. So we did not start it from scratch. And again, I think that it's important that when we take such decisions, we make sure that we do it for a good purpose and it should serve also the organization. And actually, most of the tools that we have are basically do serve a business purpose within our organization. And I think that this is key, is that we think about the value added of what we do. And I think that for sustainability topics, well, it's rather straightforward, especially for us, given we are a key actor in the climate transition.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, and for us, it was really our audit committee has oversight of ESG, and so for us, it was kind of a risk approach. You know, our audit committee, me as a controller, we're not interested in getting an opinion from auditors that we'll have to publish that we don't want people seeing. We want to have complete and accurate data. And so there's a risk in not having the right processes and procedures in place and not having the right systems in place. So the audit committee really understood that and management really understands that. So for us, it was a pretty easy investment just to reduce that risk of, non-compliance or getting a unclean audit opinion.
Thank you for that. And reducing a lot of manual labor through automation as well. Well, thank you all for the great questions and for joining us today. We've got 2 minutes left. So before we close, I just want to share 2 key points. Schneider Electric has walked this path ourselves. We released our 2024 annual CSRD compliant report this year, and we are here to help you do the same. And second, we'll be sharing our CSRD fact sheet with you all after the webinar. So please do keep an eye out for that in your inbox as a resource. And otherwise, thanks again for your time and engagement, everyone. We look forward to supporting you on your CSRD journey. And have a great rest of your day.